It's The World This Week. The World This Week in partnership with The Daily Beast. Joining us from headquarters in New York City, Noor Ibrahim, managing editor at The Daily Beast. Thanks for being with us.
Thanks for having me.
Vivian Walt is Paris correspondent for Time magazine. How are things?
Good to be here.
Good to see you. Good to see Nicholas Norbrook. We have a second managing editor on this panel. He's managing editor at the Africa Report. What's your cover story this week?
We're working on Lagos, big story on Lagos and how it can maybe be the locomotive for Nigeria.
Okay. Also with us, independent journalist Borzu Daragahi. How are things?
Great. Great to see you.
Great to see you as well. You can listen, like, and subscribe to The World This Week on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and other fine streaming services. Now, the U.S. presidential election campaign's only starting. The vote is not until November. And for the oldest incumbent in history, it's been, well, a bad week.
You know, right after I was elected, I went to what they call a G7 meeting, all the NATO leaders. It was in the south of England. And I sat down and I said, America's back. And Mitterrand from France looked at me and said, you know, why, how long are you back for?
Okay, so he meant Macron. Mitterrand's been dead for more than a quarter century. 2 days later, another fundraiser. The 81-year-old has a chance to correct the error in his stump speech.
Then Helmut Kohl of Germany looked at me and said, "What would you say, Mr. President, if you picked up the London Times tomorrow morning and learned that 1,000 people had broken down the doors of the British Parliament, and killed some people on the way in?"
And finally, there was Biden in a nationally televised press conference on Thursday.
As you know, initially, the president of Mexico, Sisi, did not want to open up the gate to allow humanitarian material to get in. I talked to him. I convinced him to open the gate.
Borzu Daragahi, is this just, you know, the Joe Biden we've always known?
No, it's not. You know, actually, I've been following this man's career since the Clarence Thomas hearings. I actually met him once in northern Iraq. He was sharp, much sharper than he is now. But I mean, this is what you're going to get. He's a little up there, and you know, this kind of behavior, these kind of gaffes, are just, you know, naturally what happens when people get older. And you know, I don't think that it is a complete disaster for him. But it does obscure any positive message that he would want to get out there. And he's not. Also, what I notice more than anything is just rather low energy in his speaking. And you know, that's actually a shame, because the U.S. economy is doing pretty well. You know, there's a lot of foreign policy troubles that the U.S. is somewhat handling at least. And it's got multiple challenges, and he's not able to convey the message of competence economically and internationally that the Democrats and Biden need ahead of the elections.
Yeah, that's a press conference. You saw that last clip was following a special prosecutor clearing Biden for taking classified documents when he left the vice presidency in 2017. The Daily Beast headlined, the U.S. president is angry at that press conference and angered by the report, where he's described as a well-meaning elderly man with a poor memory. Interestingly enough, well, that was the lead in the New York Post, Noor Ibrahim, the New York Post owned by Rupert Murdoch. Do you take Borzu Daragahi's point that it's becoming a liability, though, if he is not able to project the energy needed to defend his record?
Absolutely. I think because at some point it's not even about how his cognitive abilities really are. It's about how much they can be exploited by Republicans, by the media. So I think in this case, even if he does manage to prove that, you know, he's in a good state, that he can carry on, that he's not, you know, past the point of no return here, these are moments caught on camera that are very easily exploitable. And the polls show that, yes, there is a great concern. I think any average American seeing those clips one after the other will have concerns. And I think, it's obviously important to raise those questions, but at the same time, try to assess whether the questions and the allegations are being done in good faith to actually get to the truth of the matter, or whether it's just political gameplay.
It may be political gameplay in the United States, Vivian Walt, but everybody here in France is talking about it this Friday. They're all wondering what's going on in America.
Well, not just France, I think everybody in the world. I mean, this is an election which has massive ramifications for the rest of the world. Who wins in November is going to have a direct impact on all sorts of things, the Middle East, the Ukraine war, and so on. I mean, just to get back to what Noor and Borzu were saying, this is a snapshot in early February. The thing about aging is you get older and older week by week. And we don't know, actually, if, I'm not a doctor. I have no idea the state of, President Biden's brain. But one thing is for sure, it is aging, and it will be considerably older in 8-9 months' time from now, not to mention 2, 3, 4 years' time. And I think this is really, really bad for him. Maybe sort of terminally bad for his campaign.
Terminally bad? So what happens then?
I think that's the real quandary for the Democrats, is that there's no clear alternative. And I think it's probably too late for an alternative. So, if you talk to anybody involved in the Democratic Party, they express a kind of fear, a sense of just foreboding, I guess, about this election.
Mind you, if Joe Biden's to run for re-election and make it all the way, he still won't be older than Cameroon's Paul Biya, who's 4 days shy of his 91st birthday and who's being encouraged to run again in 2025, Nicholas Norbrook.
Indeed, I was, struck by the fact that while, sitting here in the West, we're an older population and our leaders are old. I don't have much in common with Nikki Haley, but when she sort of looked at both Biden and Trump and said, these guys are too old to be running countries, I kind of agree. But that's kind of the politics we're in. It's a majority old population in the West, and the leadership are old, and it's kind of coherent. On the continent, in Africa, most of the people are young, just to cut to the chase. Very young populations, very, very old leaderships. And that is a far more fissile situation, I think. Obviously, we've seen what's going on in Senegal, and that's less, I think, to do about
We'll talk about Senegal in a moment.
But if you look at Cameroon, if you look at Nigeria...
I mean, you had a queen in England who was there till the age of 96.
Sure. I mean, I wouldn't really want to go into exactly the role the Queen plays in the politics of everyday UK, but I'm sure a lot of people, in the UK are asking themselves questions about, do we have a king now who's also suffering from, some of the impacts of time that you so eloquently described? It's a difficult question. I think seeing in Nigeria president after president who have to spend half of their term coming back to the UK for medical attention, it's a shame that we can't seem to fix this in other parts of the world.
Noor Ibrahim, do the Democrats have an alternative if at this late date? Is there a plan B?
I don't really know if there is at this point. And I think, one of the issues here is that this reputation for memory loss, these moments that keep getting captured on camera are really sticking to Biden's reputation. And what seems to kind of fall through the cracks here too is that Trump has made similar mix-ups with names in public several times, I think, over the past few months. And Biden definitely seems to be getting a lot more heat for it than he does. And I think, the issue here becomes, is it just bad on both sides of the aisle? I think it's just also important to distinguish between Biden, just the way he speaks and the cadence and how that differs from Trump. And I think, when you have someone like Trump speaking, he can more easily mask those moments. And it's hard to tell whether, is he just as bad as Biden with all these mix-up, or is he simply just louder? But yeah, I think that I can't really think of a plan B at this point. And I think getting to the bottom of this issue and Biden's decision to do like a surprise press conference, which isn't that common, and speaking as forcefully and angrily as he did is a big indicator of the kind of panic and the realization that this is an issue that could really, really damage his prospects here.
Yeah, and we can't stress enough, it's kind of an important job he holds. Currently in Washington, the German chancellor, the actual one, Olaf Scholz, there to press decision makers to keep supporting Ukraine. The Middle East, there's so much at stake, Borzo Dargai.
Yeah, I mean, it's an important time. It's a key juncture in world history, as well as in U.S. politics. And look, I mean, the bottom line is, it's a pain to vote in U.S. elections. You have to prepare in advance. You have to fill out forms. You have to get ready. It's not like most countries. You have to go through all sorts of paperwork, and there has to be a little bit of motivation. It's not like you just show up on election day and cast your ballot. And if Biden is not able to motivate people, even ahead of the elections, to go out there and re-register every single election cycle to vote, there's going to be real trouble. Regardless of what poll numbers are there, and his poll numbers aren't looking great either, if he's not able to inspire at all in the way that Obama inspired or Trump kind of inspires people, he's going to be in big trouble.
Yeah, and Trump getting, you could say, I don't know if we can call it an endorsement, but certainly 2 hours of airtime on Thursday for the talk show host Tucker Carlson, who's a big fan, interviewing Russia's president. Vladimir Putin only too happy to oblige with his explanation of what Russia's currently doing in Ukraine.
We have every reason to affirm that Ukraine is an artificial state.
Did you call a U.S. President, Secretary of State, and say, if you keep militarizing Ukraine with NATO forces, this is going to we're going to act?
Our goal is to stop this war, and we did not start this war in 2022. This is an attempt to stop it.
Vivian Walt?
Just the whole spectacle of him kind of rewriting history is just a little hard to watch. But, and also talking about leaders who want to stay in power too long, we're talking about aging leaders. Once again, another aging leader. We have, Putin, who's been in power for nearly a quarter of a century. But what strikes me here is sort of anybody would have taken an interview with President Putin. I mean, everybody in the Western press has been trying to get an interview with President Putin for the last 2 years, and he hasn't given any. And he now gives an interview to kind of somebody who really doesn't have much of an outlet whatsoever, and who'll maybe ask him softball questions. But the fact is that he had an opportunity to blast out a message to, the biggest audience he could find, and he didn't. So in a sense, he wound up looking a lot weaker than you would imagine.
Really? You agree with that, Nicholas Norbrook?
I don't know. I just want to confirm that I also did not receive a positive to my interview request with Putin. I don't know. He sort of launches into 20 minutes of Russian history or rewriting of history. And I just want to, at this point, plug a book. I don't do this on this show. I apologize.
Go for it.
But I have to, because a British historian called Norman Davies wrote this 1,000-page book called Vanished Kingdoms, about the last 1,000 years in Europe, but it goes into Lithuania, Belarus, and really unpacks that part of the world in such a fascinating way. And I do think we have a blind spot in Paris, in London, I wouldn't want to speak about New York, but I do think we have a blind spot about how that part of the world came together. And we shouldn't let that be filled in by Putin. So I think we should all go home and buy this book and be able to push back with actual credible and widespread arguments.
I mean, the bottom line is there was a referendum in 1991, and we should never forget this. And, more than 95% of the Ukrainian people voted for independence. And they voted to be Ukraine separate from Russia and the then Soviet Union. And that includes people who live in the, supposedly pro-Russian, Russian linguistic east of Ukraine. They were above 89, 90% of those provinces voted for independence from Russia. So whatever, and Russia recognized that. So he can talk all he wants, Putin, about this, and he can pick the journalist that actually called Volodymyr Zelensky, called him a rat, Tucker Carlson. Okay, called him a rat. That's what he picks him as his kind of platform to talk his lies, and no one is going to challenge him because Tucker Carlson, he clearly worships Putin. So he didn't challenge him. So yeah, it's another world. And I agree with Vivian here, though, that it does show sort of that he went for a little tiny blogger, not 60 Minutes, didn't have the confidence to go to the traditional big-time American news outlets, and went with this little blogger.
Very briefly, Noor Ibrahim, is this something talked about, or is this just foreign policy and nobody cares?
I think everyone cared about this interview. So much speculation leading up to it about when it was going to drop. I don't know if I would call Tucker a little vlogger. I mean, I think the reason Putin went with him is probably because he knows that he wouldn't have been challenged as much. And I mean, let's be real, he's been putting in the work pandering to Putin for a very long time leading up to this. But at the same time, he does have a massive following here. Most people that I know, at least in the industry, watch this or at least have seen clips about it. Did he prove that, he went in there with no actual intention of challenging him on anything? Absolutely. Was it a little embarrassing and painful to watch? Absolutely. But I think a lot of people were tuning into that. And, he doesn't have, Tucker doesn't have this big network behind him at all now, too. So I think there was definitely just some security and assurance in that. But in terms of reach, I do think it got, a pretty wide audience here.
By the way, that Thursday press conference where Biden lost his patience with the special prosecutor challenging his memory, that wasn't the only thing he lost his patience with.
I'm of the view, as you know, that the conduct of the response in Gaza, in the Gaza Strip, has been over the top. I think that, as you know, initially, the president of Mexico, Sisi, did not want to open up the gate to allow humanitarian material to get in. I talked to him. I convinced him to open the gate. I talked to Bibi to open the gate on the Israeli side. I've been pushing really hard to get humanitarian assistance into Gaza.
Yeah, putting aside the Mexico and Sisi bit, he's clearly showing impatience now at this point, but...
It's just about Michigan. I mean, it's just about Michigan. He has to play this, because Michigan is a swing state, and there's a very large Arab American community there, and he will not win the presidency if he loses Michigan.
Right, so it's just going to stop at that.
They're not going to do. The U.S. has so much leverage over Israel, and it's not taking any steps. Literally not doing anything except some rhetorical moves that most likely they're probably, signaling ahead to the Netanyahu administration that these rhetorical gestures are going to come out.
Right. Facts on the ground and certainly illustrate that it's been a brutal week and it's going to get perhaps even more brutal. 4 months after Hamas's attack on Israel, Israeli forces now pounding Gaza's southernmost city of Rafah. Israel's prime minister is pouring cold water on hopes of a truce deal anytime soon, despite U.S., Qatar, and Egyptian mediators still hard at it.
This evening, I want to tell you one thing. We are on the path of total victory. Victory is within reach. It's not a matter of years or decades. It's a matter of months.
Total victory, he claims, Vivian Walt. And he doesn't just claim total victory that it's going to take months, not days or weeks, but months. He's also now saying that he wants the Israeli military to evacuate civilians while pounding Rafah, which is the last city where the Israeli army is not present on the ground.
It really is very hard to figure out where 2 million people go. They are essentially cornered in the last piece of Gaza that's supposedly been their sanctuary, albeit like a terrible, miserable situation.
Do you agree with Borzu that they have no intention of the United States of doing anything about it?
I think that the U.S. would be very hard-pressed at this point to withhold aid from Israel, particularly given the president. I mean, we have the most pro-Israel president maybe in the history of Israel. But I do think that the U.S. elections it hangs on so few votes that things like the ceasefire talks in Israel are critical to the U.S. elections, even though they're many months away, because so few people are going to decide the U.S. elections. And I think that's a real problem. It's a real problem for Netanyahu as well. I think he realizes that, the U.S. is definitely in a bind politically, and that...
Noor Ibrahim, the U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken was still in Israel when Benjamin Netanyahu made those remarks. Blinken, who went on to the next day post for the cameras with members of the opposition that are in the coalition war cabinet who have more moderate stances, Gadi Eisenkot and Benny Gantz. Is there any sign that the United States is telling Netanyahu to wind it down?
I think that they're playing it safe. I think everyone involved is playing it safe at this point. And the reason we're hearing a little bit more, open criticism, a little more boldness with their responses here is because Netanyahu is on a downward spiral. And it's not just, the situation now is that he's not just at war with Hamas, he's warring with his own war cabinet officials, including one who went on live television a couple weeks ago and basically called him a liar and said, his goal of eliminating Hamas entirely is a fantasy. Essentially, it's not going to happen. There's no way forward in that way. You have the hostage families who are also very angry and being extremely vocal about it. With some that we interviewed even saying the goal right now is to just, disrupt the government as much as we can because we don't believe that they're prioritizing our family members. So really, it's just coming from all sides. And I think once you have that kind of, political turmoil internally, what happens is that it becomes safer for Biden to step in and also make some of his own criticisms. So I think they're definitely just following the lead of people there on the ground. I don't think it's, I don't think it's any kind of like bold gesture and true intentions.
And what about Hamas itself, which took a long time to give an answer to the first offer, a long truce and Palestinian prisoners for Israeli hostage exchange, and upped the ante considerably with demands that were branded as crazy by the Israeli prime minister, but were politically, in fact, impossible for Israel to accept. Why is Hamas upping the stakes?
I'm sorry, Francois, my earpiece
Your
fell off while you
earpiece
were
fell
asking
out.
that question. Could you repeat that?
The question was,
Sum it
why
up.
is Hamas also, it's not just Netanyahu, it's also Hamas upping the stakes. Why?
I think there's an understanding that Netanyahu is getting cornered. There's more pressure, there's more backlash every day, there's more outrage, and that Netanyahu is kind of losing allies, losing any kind of confidence or trust that the public had. And once they're in that situation, I think it becomes easier to make a demand like that, to say it's over. And the response that we're seeing from world governments, from human rights organizations, there's so much, the South Africa's case brought against Israel, there's a lot of different sides that are becoming bolder with their push for
all
this
this
war to end.
after 4 months.
And I think if they can...
Yeah, I was going to say after 4 months.
And I think that just...
Yeah.
Right? The reason, I think, why is this happening in the first? Because we're at a point where you have quite literally, I think, I don't even remember the last number, but 25,000 people killed. This is a war that has been caught on camera. It's a war where I don't think I remember the last time where the images are just completely inescapable. It's everywhere. No one can turn a blind eye to this at some point, because what we're seeing is horrific. It's horrific on every level. And at some point, enough voices are going to start acting against it in a way that hasn't really happened before. So I think it's that kind of momentum that makes way for demands like that in the negotiations.
Yeah, Nicholas Norbrook, the Palestinians, we've had guests tell us that on this, that more and more within Gaza, there have been those complaining that the absolutist position of Hamas is leading to death and destruction as well, and it's pretty brave of some people to speak up, because in the Gaza Strip it's not easy with Hamas in charge. Yet the hardliners on both sides seem to be winning the day.
Well, it's a little bit like the way that Boris Johnson only really existed because of Brexit, and when Brexit went away, there was no reason for him to be, and he disappeared very quickly. You get the impression, I think the polls, for what they're worth, show that in Israel, maybe 15% want Netanyahu to remain after this crisis is finished. They're done with Netanyahu, even though he is the eternal survivor. Netanyahu needs this crisis. Perhaps in a similar way, Hamas senior leadership need the crisis too. That's the only way they can maintain some kind of relevance.
I mean, the groups, the so-called axis of resistance that includes Iran, includes the Houthis, includes the Iraqi Shia militia, these and Hezbollah of Lebanon, they thrive on crises. They thrive. They get energy from the negative feedback they get from the West, and go ahead, condemn us, condemn what we do. We know that our battle is righteous. Go ahead, send missiles to our enemies and help. We will fight you till the end, and this helps mobilize. This is the mentality of the so-called axis of resistance. That they basically thrive off of that crisis mode.
Right. For decades now, it's been hailed as a rare beacon of democracy in a neighborhood, well, peppered by coups and corruption. But it's not a good look when gendarmes in Senegal clear parliament of opposition MPs so that presidential elections scheduled for later this month can be delayed all the way back to December. April is when the mandate of term-limited outgoing President Macky Sall was due to end.
For my part, my solemn undertaking not to stand in the presidential election remains unchanged. I will initiate an open national dialogue to create the conditions for free, transparent and inclusive elections in a Senegal that is at peace and reconciled.
That made panelists furious hearing that last sentence, Nicholas Norbrook, earlier this week because they're saying, what, the conditions for the election were here. It was now we're supposed to have the election, not later. Why are you pushing this back?
I'm speaking to contacts and correspondents in Senegal. Everyone is totally shocked. Really, no one saw this coming. And yet it feels super well planned. It feels very orchestrated. And if you look at the way Macky Sall has been, working with the MPs of Karim Wad's party, you start looking at their voting pattern in the last few months.
Karim Wad, whose father he beat in a contested election in 2012.
Indeed. And Karim Wad, who he, tried to send to jail in various moments. So people didn't expect an alliance to be struck up between these two figures, but it does appear that that's exactly what has happened. It's not really a delayed election. It's almost like an election where everything starts back to zero. All the counters go back to zero. What they're trying to do is change the rules of the game. So obviously the Constitutional Council is under fire from all sides. There's a particular way in which candidates can come in this election, and some of that has a popular
But to decide
portion.
it was the day where the official campaign period started. Our colleagues at Radio France International had pre-recorded interviews with 18 candidates.
One can only feel sorry for our colleagues who missed got all that work and failed it. But we won't see 18 candidates. What he wants to do is make it so essentially only 4 or 5 coalitions, selected only via MPs and local officials, can put candidates forward. So you won't get 18, you'll get 4 or 5. And in that way, Macky Sall can become kingmaker.
Right. Senegal. You remember it's the place where Barack Obama visited, Bill Clinton, George W. Bush.
Great music.
It's, this example. This is the place where they don't have coups. And yet, opposition leader right now, the most formidable candidate's in jail. His number 2, who made it onto the ballot, is also in jail. What's going on?
It is, I think the most damaging scene, and you pointed it out very well in the piece that you ran before, is just the spectre of actual armed gendarmes clearing out the opposition. It couldn't be more stark than that.
So a vote could take place.
So a vote can take place. It was, which of course it went through. I think there was only one that voted against it. But yes, of course, it was totally orchestrated. What's interesting is that, this comes after a series of coups in the region. And Senegal was actually thought to be the one that would hold out and not, be stable. And it was, going to remain the one democratic hope. So I think I can't answer the question about what's happened. It's just extremely disappointing.
Porzo Dargai?
I don't have a lot of background in this. I would defer to Nicholas, but just observing this and watching it over the last week or so unfolding, it just strikes me that this is the sort of normalization of the undermining of democracy that you see. This is China's agenda. This is Russia's agenda. This is the part where people stop even pretending to, go through the democratic motions anymore.
And yet this isn't like Mali. It isn't a country, Nick, correct me if I'm wrong, where there's big power interference happening here.
Oh, sure there is. Senegal?
There's plenty in Senegal, yeah, there is plenty. Big Chinese influence, also very big French influence, and there has been for 150 years and counting.
The French are lying low in this one. They put out, I looked at it earlier.
They lie low.
They put out a statement calling on authorities to remove the uncertainties regarding the election timetable.
Really standing up for democracy there.
Asking that the vote take place as soon as possible, in compliance with the Constitution. But that's from the start of the week. There's been no official communique since.
No, and they probably won't make much noise on media platforms. The Americans have been much more upfront. They said that the vote that happened on Monday was absolutely not democratic, and they were waiting to see what happened next. It is a very tough time for the region. You've got the regional body, ECOWAS, which has lost these three countries, Mali, Burkina Faso, and Niger regionally. So they are reeling. They're trying to figure out, it's not quite Brexit, but figuring out how to run this organization, let alone putting democratic pressure on Senegal to, get back into the right way.
Yeah, it's another crisis for ECOWAS, as you say, coups in Burkina Faso, Mali, and Niger. And just a couple of weeks back, those three countries announcing they're leaving ECOWAS rather than submit to a schedule for return to civilian rule. ECOWAS, which this week called on Senegal to restore its electoral calendar urgently.
What we see happening in Senegal is regrettable and is likely to challenge us on the role of the communities to which we belong. Should ECOWAS and West African Economic and Monetary Union this time condemn or not?
Should they condemn or not? And when we sanction, we say not to punish. What should we do, he says, Patrice Talon.
I mean, I wouldn't want his job, that's for sure. They are in a bind. I don't think many expected it to be so complicated so quickly in Abuja. They just had taken up the mantle of leadership of ECOWAS, new president, a reboot for Nigeria. Nigeria, which is 2/3 of the GDP of the region, is finally back in charge with a guy with a certain track record of pushing back against autocrats in the 1990s. Admittedly, he's another one who may well be in his 80s as well, so suffering the same kind of cognitive imbalances that we can see in Washington. But it was thought maybe Nigeria's back. In the 1990s, Nigeria, when there were problems in Liberia, they'd sweep in, problem solved. People had hoped that the sort of 15-year absence of Nigeria from West African diplomacy was suddenly going to be righted. You remember Olusegun Obasanjo, when he was there, he was listened to. Finally, we were going to get a Nigeria who people would listen to. But we haven't got it. We haven't got it in Abuja, and the region itself doesn't appear to have the rudder at the moment.
Well, perhaps they could use a one-man army or a one-woman army. Taylor Swift, we're talking about. On Sunday, she became the first artist to win Best Album for a fourth time at the Grammys in Los Angeles. That was before tour dates in Japan and ahead of Sunday's Super Bowl in Las Vegas, where her boyfriend, Travis Kelce, is the star tight end for the Kansas City Chiefs playing against the San Francisco 49ers.
I was wondering if you can help me complete this lyric here. Karma is the guy on the...
Chiefs, of course.
Finish it. Coming straight.
What's the second question?
Noor Ibrahim, Travis Kelce knows his lyrics.
Yeah, he sure does. I mean, this whirlwind of news about where they are, what they're doing, which game she's attending, which game she's not. I absolutely underestimated how long the media would still be interested in whether she's at a game or not. I think by the fourth and fifth, I was like, there's no way this is still going to be news, but it is. And I think it just speaks to the star power that this artist has. I think it's just reached a point where it's just so there's no one who hasn't heard about this. Even if you're not, into pop music or football, you've definitely heard about this, and there's just no escaping it. So
what is it? So what is it about Taylor Swift? Because people here in Europe are asking, who are these Swifties? What is this about?
Well, first of all, it's about her music. I think the main draw to Taylor Swift is that young people or young girls who are now young women have been listening to her and growing with her and find her music and her lyrics very relatable. And she's also someone who has, been through a lot in her music career, the ups and downs of that, the gossip and the scandals and, reaching points where, maybe not everyone was a fan of Taylor Swift and just kind of rising from that and just delivering always. And yeah, I think that's what I hear, at least from big Taylor Swift fans, is that she keeps coming back no matter what happens. Whether it's the Kanye Swift thing, the Kim Kardashian thing, she rises from the ashes. And yeah, I think everyone's hooked at this point.
All right, so a tale of resilience. Here to comment on it is resident Swiftologist Borzu Dargai.
No, it's hilarious because my daughter, actually, you look at my Spotify, it says that Taylor Swift is the most streamed artist on my Spotify list because my daughter also shares the Spotify account. But yeah, I mean, I've been immersed in this world of Taylor Swift now for well over a year. You know, I mean, it's, as a parent, I think it's great. You know, she doesn't have tattoos. She doesn't like visibly, do drugs or drink alcohol. She goes on tour with her cats and her mom. You know, so it's like as a parent of an 11-year-old who's, and then I listen to the songs. They're pretty cool. They're pretty catchy. The lyrics are empowering. There's not a lot of negative there. It's, then you read about her career.
She calls out her exes sometimes.
Yeah, she calls out her exes, but she's also, as an industry leader, she has, kind of been an artist who's taken control of her own financial future. She has defied the streaming services. She has defied the labels, record labels. So it's in a way it's understandable. And by the way, she's pretty big in Europe as well. As a matter of fact, those 4 shows in Paris, one of which I'm going to with my daughter, they're all so sold out you can't even get tickets in the aftermarket. So even forget about StubHub at this point. The shows in May. So, it's popular not just in the U.S., it is a phenomenon in Europe as well.
Nicholas Norbrook.
Yeah, I can confirm +1 in my household as well. Swift is very strong on the Spotify playlist. And she's done great things in terms of, standing up to music companies, taking her music, re-recording it and re-releasing it. That level of empowerment is terrific to see. And we were talking about it earlier. She really is helping reinvent a kind of model for musical artists who, previously may not have seen such an obvious way to make money. Streaming services is not going to do it. And maybe it's the shows. Maybe that's where you make your money.
Totally. She is a billionaire. She's the first billionaire, I think, performer in a long time, if ever. She has totally rewritten the way that musicians can run their business. She is a big business person. And I think that's been also quite an inspiration. Let alone the fact that her music is, virally catchy, not only for young women, in fact, as Noor said. I think she's intergenerational, and she's pretty much one of a kind.
All right, the Midas touch up to a point. Los Angeles to Tokyo to Las Vegas this week. That's irked some environmentalists. Taylor Swift's attorneys threatening legal action against a college student who ran an account tracking the movements on her private jet while calculating her carbon footprint. So it's not everybody who's a Swiftie, is it, Noor Ibrahim?
No, absolutely not. I think that was an interesting thing to report on and see that it's the same person who got into it with Elon Musk for tracking his jet publicly, and it's interesting because the account, it really just, you can see everything that is happening there, including 8-minute flights, 13-minute flights, and it's difficult with Taylor Swift though, because I do think there's a genuine fear of criticizing her openly just because of how some fans can get, and it's kind of an invitation for just getting hell rained down on you, essentially. But yeah, not everyone is a fan, including all the Republicans who have been very much freaking out about
whether or not she'll endorse
Super Bowl.
Whether or not she'll endorse Joe Biden. American football fans, get ready for lots of cutaways of Taylor Swift on Sunday during the big game.
I think it is a wonderful thing. She is an awesome person, and it just really adds to the excitement of being here for Super Bowl.
Well, you know one thing. I mean, Las Vegas is a spectacle. And if it's a spectacle, and this woman is a everybody is like a goddess. And in this case, what I say is, a person like that should not get involved in politics. Game is fine, no politics.
Is Elvis a Republican, Boris Darga?
He was at the end of his career, but not at the... No, but look, I mean, that's ridiculous, and we've heard that for forever, especially from politicians on the right. Artists shouldn't get involved in politics. Meanwhile, you have all sorts of other people, including lawyers, engineers, et cetera, doctors, getting involved in politics. If Taylor Swift wants to make her political opinion known, she is a leader, and she has that right.
All right, we'll leave it there. Boris Darga, I want to thank you. I want to thank Vivian Walt, Nicholas Norbrook, Noor Ibrahim for being with us from New York City. Thank you for being with us here in The World This Week.